Well, hello, Anna. Welcome to Rendering Unconscious. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks, Vanessa.
And we're going to talk all about your new book, An Earthquake is a Shaking of the Surface of the Earth, a novel. And like I was just telling you before we recorded, this is the second novel I've read recently by a poet, the first one being Vivienne by Emily Rousseau. And I want poets to write more books. These are such lovely, fantastic novels.
That's so great. I'm so glad that you like them. I'm really obsessed with poets, with why poets writing novels is such a specific thing, but maybe we'll get to that. Maybe we
I
will.
had never thought about it before, but now
Yeah.
I'm kind of getting interested in that. So we can talk about that whenever you want. How did you come up with the idea for this book? The protagonist is such a fascinating character. I really love her.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't always have a specific answer to that, but this book I feel like there was like there were circumstances, there was an artistic challenge. So there were world circumstances, an artistic challenge, the constant stuff going on in my head. Like I seem to always be obsessed with some sort of subject matter, and it kind of rules, and develops over the years. And it's almost like there was an inciting incident. It's almost like the story. This is not a particularly narrative or story-based book in certain ways. I mean, that's part of that poet fiction writer thing. But I feel like the narrative of how it came is like a real story for me. So it was, or it could be. I haven't exactly formulated it. I was so I'd written three poetry books, and this is my third novel. And I think that doesn't mean that I like moved from poetry to fiction. I feel like after the third of my poetry books, I was translating a bunch of fiction, and that sort of set this challenge for me to write my first novel, because I kept like when you translate, you're like writing. So I'd written without having to come up with the content. I had sort of My body had gone through the motions of like writing at least four full novels through translation, and I think that that's part of what set the challenge for my first novel. And then I just, the first one kind of set the challenge for the next one. And it sort of has gone like that. And I'm still doing poetry in the background. So this one, I I was I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. I was really focused on writing poetry, and I still am. But the poetry had gotten to a point where um, it's like I'm so deep in a couple of like long poems and projects that I don't know when I'm going to emerge. So I was sort of like not sure, like would this ever happen? Would it just and then 2020 happened. I mean, the pandemic happened. Um the summer of 2020 happened. I broke my ankle. I fell off my motorcycle and broke my ankle very badly the day before I turned 50, and then like immediately went into menopause and was like locked down for so it was like I had all this stuff, everything was different. And I was in California where my partner lives, and I sort of waited out the what lockdown there, even though I work in New York. But I was just there. So I was like, and that's where I'm from also. So I grew up in Los Angeles. So I was back in the homeland, like the place that I grew up with my love, and watching his kids go through adolescence and become, adults. And they were both like, they were like, I can't remember, like 12 and 15 or something. So it was just that moment, and I'm there. So I'm also going through all this. And then I think everyone in the pandemic, especially middle-aged people, were like, those of us who weren't like out in the world working, responding. And I was laid up, I couldn't even walk. So it was just a very reflective time. And so all of that was happening. And I had discovered Lacan and was reading more and more psychoanalysis, and had time to like listen to a lot of podcasts and take my mind off of my ankles, my pain. I had some complications with the surgery. So I was in a lot of pain. Anyway, so all of that was happening. It was just like everything was different. And then I read, and I was trying to read also, and I read Anna Kavan's book, Ice. Do you know
Oh,
this
I
book?
love her.
Yeah, so
She's amazing. I love that
she's
book.
amazing. And I just picked it up. My partner's a writer and also a past and future used bookseller. So there's just so much fiction specifically that I don't know, because I'm not that well read in fiction actually. So I was just picking things up, and I read that book, and I was just like, how does she do this? There was something she was doing with the writing, some like way of inhabiting psychological reality and interpersonal, drama and genre, almost like detective, or like there's kind of a stalkery thing and a kind of a Lolita, like all of it. And you still never quite know what's happening. You don't know if you don't know what world you're in. I'm very close with Renee Gladman. I feel like she does that too. We talk about fiction a lot. So this question of like, are you in reality or in a dream or whatever, has always been part of it. But anyway, I read Ice and I was just like, that was the spark. That was like the artistic spark. And I was like, okay, I'm thinking about healing. I'm thinking about psychoanalysis. I'm thinking about like reparenting, and I'm thinking about adolescence, and I'm trying to like, figure out who I am, in a new-ish family dynamic and all of this. And then that came in and I was like, and I want to know how to write like that. And it's almost like it could have been any like realm of subject matter, but that challenge from Anna Kavan and the fact that her name was the same as mine was like probably part of it, right? Like I was like, I want to do what she did. So that was how I started to write it. And yeah, and then I think it's just I had at that point built up, I'd been reading a lot about like coercive control and cults, and I used to be an actor, and I was thinking about performance of the self, and I was like thinking about neurodivergence and all these masking and all this stuff. And it just all kind of like, once I knew that I wanted that feeling of like a world that was unhinged the way hers was, and I wanted a little bit of like a mystery, and that I wanted all this content in there, then it just, the characters kind of came, and the voice and stuff. Just, yeah.
I love it. I love the way you wrote it, and the fact that Anna Kavan was the spark really, yeah, makes me love it even more because, yeah, when I read that book, I think I just picked it up. There's this great bookstore in Copenhagen, and whenever I go there, I just kind of like look at things and look at
Yeah.
covers or names or
Yeah.
titles and just walk around, and I just grab like random things that I don't know, and I always get the most amazing stuff, and I think that's how I got that book. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. And
Sometimes
yeah,
they
and I just
call
took
to
it
you.
home and I'm like, who is this? Like this is
It's incredible.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
Fantastic. Yeah, I love how it's not a murder mystery, but it's a psychological thriller with a strong protagonist with a strong death wish, murder wish.
Mhm. Yeah. Which is good. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really fantastic, and you clearly like psychoanalysis. And I was wondering, like, did you used to be an actor? Are you an actor? Because you know, like how you know how to describe it so well, like what the actor does and the way you use your voice and the way you present and all of these kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, I did. I grew up in Los Angeles. My parents are like as far from like the business as possible. They're academics, they're mathematicians, and my family was very like, we are not that, So of course, as the like, rebellious younger sibling, I was like totally drawn to that. So I did from a young age study acting and I was really also, I think being part of theater in school, like fulfilled some desire I had for like communal experience, because I did have a sort of a very small family, like very, serious and focused and warm, but not like gregarious, not like there weren't like people coming through the house all the time. I didn't feel like I knew what was going on in the outside world very much. It was sort of like there was academia, it's a bicultural family, so there's like immigrant, like kind of like a splitting already, like there's some part of life that's over there, like across the pond, And so yeah, so I did it, but I always was so plagued with self-consciousness, right? That like, because I was, pretty, I didn't know I was anxious until my 20s, because it was also sort of an anti-psychological family in a way, like a sort of, atheistic and no therapy and stuff like that. So I think theater for me was a place to feel like I could belong. Like I think I joined it primarily for social reasons and like identity based reasons. And then but the art of it was always a little elusive to me, the acting, because of this intense self-consciousness. So I started to get interested in other parts of it and writing. So I became someone who wrote plays and directed. And I did, I did the trainings, I did dance and voice, but only like as a sort of sideline, and I got interested in the collaborative making part. And then for the rest of my adult life, I acted through college, but mostly these other things took over and writing was like the most portable thing, right? I think acting also, I was like, I don't know who I am, so I'll just try on all these things. And then at some point I realized like, oh, you can do that with writing too. Even though I wasn't writing fiction, it was still a way to like not settle on who you were. Like you could just try things on and live a life that's an experiment. So yeah, so I feel like I came through performance into writing, and writing has always felt performative to me. And then I think something about being raised a girl, and sort of I was like the youngest, and I was sort of like I don't know. I just think I always have felt constrained a little bit by the girlness and by being sort of like normative looking. And then as I got closer to middle age, I really started to feel this sense of like, oh, like I don't have to be trapped by that, right? Which is like a whole other thing that I'm obviously thinking about a lot and is part of this story. But anyway, I had always been fascinated by like people who do something in their after the age of like 45 or 50, like that, like things that didn't feel possible suddenly become possible, specifically because you've reached a point in your life where you're not as inhibited. So I had always collected these stories of especially women, but also anyone who like either started writing late or returned to something late. And there's a few of those stories of people who started acting in their 50s. And I was always like, that's amazing. So I think there was also just a part of me that had been creeping up, like what if I tried to do that now? Would it be different? Like have I like fixed that problem of self-consciousness? And so instead of actually going out and doing it, I thought I decided to like try and inhabit it in the book.
It's wonderful. And I think probably understanding writing, like for the stage and performance and things like that, help you to write such rich characters in your novel, you know?
I'm so fascinated by I feel like I did a lot of drama theory. It's also kind of how I came to theory and why I and psychoanalysis and why I don't identify as a theorist or a scholar, but it's like really in there. I studied like philosophy and drama theory in college. And I feel like I'm just looking over here at my stack of books, but I just picked up Uta Hagen's A Challenge for the Actor, which is the second book after the first one. And yeah, I just feel like sometimes people who are writing about just about theater, about acting, get to something so like 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 I can read those things over and over again and test my own responses to the things they say about human nature and human behavior. They're just very useful texts, I feel. So
That's
I do.
very cool. I've never read anything like that. That sounds super interesting.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
very into like reading. I love psychoanalysis, but I don't like reading straight theory so much anymore. I much rather read like complex characters and psychology in
Mhm.
fiction or other ways, you know?
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I mean it's hard. It's hard. I do feel like there's I've slogged through a lot of like difficult writing that's not clear, like philosophers where the ideas are interesting, but it's like not fun to read them. And at a certain
Yeah,
point, I'm a little
exactly.
bit like, give me the good writers. Like I've been obsessed with Mary Ruti lately
Oh,
because I think
she's
she's
amazing.
so amazing and she's such a beautiful writer and soul. Like I just like I want to read her every day for the rest of my life. It's like you don't have to pick between the sophistication of your ideas and a generosity in engaging them.
It's very true. Yeah, I love her. She was really fantastic. And I love how your character, like psychoanalysis slips in. Like I love when your character talks about her theories of dreams.
Mhm. Yeah, it's funny. I had that in like my last book and maybe the one before that too. I have a pretty bad memory and I forget. I don't remember my dreams very often. I think of myself as like a dream, like a person who is a future great dreamer. Like I've been a great sleeper my whole life. Like it's been like I've always just like exhausted myself so much that I can sleep. But that means no not remembering my dreams. So I think I write about dream ideas because they're so like when I get one, I'm like, oh my God, I got one. And I like really want to like I have a dream that I remember like once every 2 months or something. But yeah, I feel like that's a future self.
Yeah, I love it. I love how she talks about yeah, like thinking of dreaming as like pe actors on a stage, you know? It's a
Mhm.
really nice idea and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It
Yeah, I
could
don't
be
know.
both symbolic and the real people.
Yeah, yeah. I think also there's like, do you know the theater maker Richard Foreman?
I know the name, but I can't say I know much.
Yeah. So when I moved to New York in the are you from New York? You lived in New York,
I'm
right?
from Miami, but I lived
You're
in New
from
York
Miami,
for
but then
10
moved back. Yeah.
years.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I moved to New York in the early 90s, Richard Foreman was still making work at the where the Poetry Project is, you know, in St.
Mm.
Mark's upstairs. The Ontological Hysterical Theater was his theater. But he had a book that he wrote. I can't remember the name, but it's like a bunch of little essays. He's a great person to like great at very generous at sort of like talking about how he made his plays. His plays were sort of famous for he would always put these strings across the theater, like between the audience and the stage, like just lots of strings. And I loved that. I went to a bunch of his plays and I loved just that constant reminder, you know, that like we're like this isn't a normal like it's a room and we're sitting and there's a stage, but it's not like but there's this like thing that's just there because he decided to do that. But anyway, he wrote a book that I forget the title of it. It has the word head in it, I think, of essays about his practice. I mean, I think he wrote more than one. And there's one in which he goes really into like how he wants people to feel when they come out of his plays as if they've had a really vivid dream, but they can't remember what it was. Like they can't remember the content, but just the feeling. And that resonated for me so much. I read that like in my early 20s and because partly because I don't tend to remember my dreams, but I do wake up with like a whole mood, you know, I was like, oh
Mm.
yeah, that's right. And I actually think that came to mind again when I read Ice because it's disorienting in that way. And I do think that that's kind of what it might be also related to poetry versus fiction. Like I don't remember when I read something or see a film, I don't remember the plot. I remember the feelings and the idea, the feelings that it produced in me and the ideas that it made me produce when talking about it right afterwards to people or something, right? And I think that's kind of similar to like you wake up not with like I will now describe the dream. It's more like like there's like non-grammatical like like content that needs to come out somehow. So it's like, yeah. So that I think dreaming and not dreaming or not remembering dreams has always been very like interesting to me and a thing that I don't that I feel like other people understand better than I do kind of thing, you know, which is always those are always kind of fun things for me because it takes the pressure off. I'm like, oh, yeah. Like
Yeah,
I'm
but
a
I love that because I often help people like when people don't like people that are coming in for analysis don't
yeah.
remember dreams, even if you just remember a fragment, but the feeling is really important because I feel like a lot of times the dream content is a way to process like a feeling that's usually some sort of like really old feeling that maybe has been repressed. It's a way to kind of bring it up and like work through it with like different kind of content than the content that really originally like caused that feeling to get
Yeah.
repressed, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And like you know, almost like I think I'll sometimes remember like a fragment of a sentence or like I'll wake up with a fragment of a sentence in my head and I won't know how it got there, whether it was through a dream, whether it had but it's almost like I mean it's so easy to, you know, we have such a problematic world that we live in that doesn't emphasize sitting with that kind of thing. But even just, you know, if you're able to like wake up in that way and spend even 10 minutes just saying like what is that, what was that, it's like a whole different day, right? You know, it's like information that's being gifted to us and that we're always having to throw away because we got to get to work or whatever. You know.
Yeah, and I
um
also feel like the way you're describing, like there's people yeah, that remember content like very detailed, like from movies or whatever, or books. But like, I feel like this is kind of like a very masculine way. And like, people sometimes think like certain like academics or scholars, or whatever, oh, they're so smart because they have this kind of memory where they can be like, well, on, page 32 of Lacan's blah, 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 then so and so said this and this and this and this, and like that masculine kind of obsessive quality is like more valued valued than the more like kind of amorphous, like feeling quality that other people might remember, often like femmes, you know? So like, not that both can't have
No, no,
either,
no. I know what you mean, though.
but
Yeah,
yeah,
totally.
I feel like that's like really valued because I feel like I also, yeah, like Carl will say something like, "Oh, do you remember we saw this?" And I'm like, I have no idea. You know, like I did not remember
Yeah.
movies like that either.
Or do you ever get in trouble? Like I'll get in so much trouble, not so much trouble, but like, you know, I'm very, as you can tell, it's like, especially when I'm a little nervous or activated, I'm very chatty. And so people will mention like a film and I'll be like, oh my God, I loved that. And then they're like, yeah, remember this. And I'm just like, oh, actually, I don't remember anything about it. I just remember I loved that film. I better go watch it again, you know? And then it's just like silence. I'm like, sorry.
I
But that's
like
just
that,
how
and
it
I feel like I like the same. I feel the same way about art. Like
is.
when I see art, I don't want to read everything about like who was created and when and why and like the context. I just want to like experience the art, look at the paintings, and then if it like resonates or gets me to feel something, then I'll like learn about the artist or the context that it was created in. But if it doesn't, then like I don't care, you know?
Yeah, totally. Well, you know, I think about this a lot because to me it connects with something that I experience in terms of like navigation, like in a physical way, like map brain versus like subjective navigation. You know, like I really love to wander. I love to get semi lost on my way somewhere. When I remember how to get somewhere, it's through like a left here or right there. It's not through like an aerial view. Like I just
Hmm.
never learned that. But I also think that that's, you know, studying philosophy, which is partly what's this, you know, one of the things this book is about is having, I think I was probably like the last generation of person in, at least I went to Berkeley, which is like traditionally a left-wing institution. And but I mean, I studied philosophy and like everyone I read was a man, every single person. And everyone I was taught with besides one person was a man. Like I don't think that's possible anymore. But going through those kind, you know, being in those kinds of situations, I don't like I feel like it's not helpful to perceive things as a map and like where am I on the map? Because you're like I'm not on the map, right? Like there's no this map wasn't drawn for me. So instead of that, I'm gonna like be a an adventurer, like going through a hostile land and seeing what there is for me, you know. And I always read like all these like I mean, like I remember like reading Schopenhauer, which is like so misogynistic, but I would still like I'm always like I put on my hat like as if I'm the person that I'm reading. And
Hmm.
only when I get to the point where it's clearly like, wait, you're not supposed to be reading this. And then I'm like, whoop, you know. But I think those things are connected. And I do think that there's like um a sort of, I mean, it plays out in my family too. Like I have, you know, a very like kind of normative nuclear family, like a mother and a father and a brother. And like my mom and I are both kind of like disoriented, you know, like she's also a mathematician, like she's very accomplished. But not like able to like bad at history, you know, because I think it's also true in terms of like just remembering where things sit on a timeline. It's like if you're not on the timeline,
Hmm.
then right, or if those are the messages you're getting, then
Hmm.
um then and if you're a person who wants to think with your whole body, which I think was just like an instinct that I had, it's impossible to like do that, right? Like if you want to think with your whole body, then you have to like allow a kind of disorientation to block out the information that's saying your body doesn't belong here, right? So I think these things are like completely connected, and I am also like, you know, I think it's like a habit that we develop, or I certainly developed habits saying, I'm bad at this, I'm bad at that. While at the same time, if you really dig in, those aren't the things I'm really ashamed of. Like I have a lot of shame issues, but I'm not actually ashamed of having bad orientation or not recalling details or history. Sometimes I'm frustrated because it would be nice to remember, and sometimes I'm made to feel bad about it, but I don't actually value that other way more than the way I do it, you know, but it's like but it's so it's weird that I still walk around all the time saying I have a bad memory, I have a bad this, bad, you know. But I think
Yeah,
it's
but
just
it's
this thing, right?
conditioning. It gets so
Yeah,
ingrained in people. I feel like that's what psychoanalysis, like in practice, is all about, is helping people kind of
totally.
locate these and be like, wait, do I really think that? Like, where did I get
Right.
that message? But just because you
Right.
realize where it came from doesn't mean it stops automatically, you know?
Totally.
It's
If
in there.
only. Yeah, totally.
that also reminded me, your character talks about, and you touched on this a little bit, but like when she's playing a character, then there's like no shame. I've been teaching this class on Tim Burton, which, I
Oh,
realized
yes.
like no, there's like nothing scholarly written about Tim
That's
Burton.
so
Like I don't
interesting.
know if he's
Yeah.
just too pop culture or something,
Mhm.
but the more I'm like learning about him and watching his interviews and reading about him, he's first of all such a magical person. And second of all, like I really like the symbolism and things that he uses, and it's totally like directly like I keep finding things like directly out of his childhood stories. It's like boop directly into the films. Like
Oh,
like
interesting.
he's so psychoanalytic, and I love it. And but anyway, he talks about his characters like when he's talking about Beetlejuice, for example, and he's finding that the more like kind of makeup and disguise that the actors put on, the more they seem to be able to be free in their expression and kind of more wild and like really into it. And that
Yeah.
reminded me of that. I think that's really interesting.
Oh, totally. I mean, I don't know how you were about masking. Like, I know a lot of people, there was like the health related, there's the politics, there are all these different, but I knew a lot of people who were like, I hate wearing a mask. I can't wait till I don't have to wear a mask. And I was just like, I love wearing a mask. Just going out in the world, like unless it's really hot or whatever. That has always, yeah, that sort of the freedom that comes when you're not being um looked, or when you're not being seen. It's almost like if one of everyone's primary, traumas is not being seen in some way or not being fully met or to different degrees, it seems strange that replicating that, actually relieves it. But I feel like it, right? Like giving people, I mean, it makes sense, right? It's like now I know why you can't see me because I'm wearing a mask, and then you don't have to like be worried about it. But yeah, disguises and things, totally, yeah, that completely makes sense. And I think I think where it gets confusing with things like the performance of gender, like I just love being around, I teach, so being alive in this moment regarding gender is just such a like, it's not even like exciting or hopeful. I mean, it is those things, but it's also just like a relief, to sort of have the extremely widespread um, conversation around gender and performance, where it's not just in these like corners, and also like and also about like the fluidity of identity, and like having these conversations is like it's like the anxiety around like, am I what I'm supposed to be? Am I like solidly that? Like, are people seeing, it's like so coded, or it has been so coded in our like gender binaries, and seeing that relax a little bit just reminds me of what you're saying. Like I think the confusing thing is being told you're not wearing a mask when you're wearing a mask, like being told like you're just like, oh, just, be pretty or something, as
Mhm.
if that's like being yourself. So yeah, sorry, that
Totally. No, I think it's incredible as well, this moment. I never imagined that like this kind of discussion on gender and fluidity would be like so in the mainstream. Like,
I know,
with
I
me, like
know.
me and my queer friends or witchy friends or something, like sure, that's been like that, since I was
Yeah, no,
early
totally.
20s, adolescence, but like I didn't
Right.
ever imagine it
But
would
it's
get mainstream
everywhere.
beyond like Fox News.
I know, I
Like
know.
what?
And I know. And also like um I love how that conversation, I mean it's like other I feel like there's a few conversations happening now, not just conversations, but I mean Israel Palestine is one of them, and settler colonial violence, and gender, and just kind of like, I guess, kind of neoliberalism versus communism, like these things that happen, that these like intense sort of splitting conversations that happen in a way across like conventional ideological and political categories, right? Like we all know people who are like consider themselves progressive, but are like a little suspicious of like gender affirmation surgery or whatever, right? Like it doesn't always fit. And we all know people, and then, and obviously with like Palestine, it's like complete, you can't even like always predict how someone's going to produce some big feelings about something. And it's like, whoa. And I think that's super interesting too. And I remember like being very, very moved, but also like, yeah, of course. In about 20 or not 20, maybe 15 years ago, when you started to see reports of like, families in the South who are like conservative Christians but have a trans kid and like come out in support, where it was just kind of like, right, this uh these, liberatory eruptions, right? Like it's like something in the fabric has finally ripped and like things have to change. They can have echoes everywhere, not just in like sophisticated culture. In fact, that's often a place where there's like a little bit of a like, you know. So I also love that about how that's all transpired, which is not to say that, it's completed by any,
No,
or
but
even
it seems
or
like
even
it's
that we know
happening,
where
which
it's
is
going, right?
great. I'm just getting a lot of pushback, of course, but that's to be expected.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
You
And
can't put a lid on it again though.
no,
They can't
no.
it's already whatever they say, the cat's out of the bag or whatever.
Cat's out of
Can't
the
put the
bag.
toothpaste back in the tube.
Yeah, exactly. I think so.
Which is good.
Yeah.
Um, what else did I want to say about your book? There was so many, I don't know, I just love the way you write and the way you had phrased certain sentences. You talked about desire and you talked about falling, walking is a form of falling that's uh controlled
Mhm.
falling. So just so many like beautiful ways that you phrase things throughout the book.
I don't know where that comes from. I feel like I heard that somewhere. Walking is controlled falling, I'm sure. But then that didn't stop me from making it the first line of my book. It's like, all right.
Yeah, but it's beautiful. It's a beautiful way to start, and it also reflects the character's kind of state of mind, and also the physical reality. It seems like wait, are they keeping earthquakes and tremors? Is this from also from growing up in LA?
Yeah. Yeah, partly. I mean, I did grow up with all kinds of earthquakes. And I also I was very young, like I was under a year old, and there was a big earthquake in 1971, I think, in LA. And my family has very few stories. Like I have very few early memories. Same that whole I forget and bad memory thing. And of course, I don't remember this, but there's one little story in my family that my mother was like stone cold, like calm during this huge earthquake. And I was nursing and she walked out of the house with me and I kept nursing. Like this is like a story so there's like this feeling that like an earthquake was melded for me with safety and security. Which is interesting. I mean, I've never actually put it that way before, but I think if there's a defining commitment to my entire life, it's probably open-endedness. Like it's always like not closing it down, not having firm ground. Like it's just in every part of my life and that's been expressed. And maybe it has something to do with like the conflation of like good mothering or like, being fed during like the worst earthquake of the decade. But I definitely grew up with earthquakes. And then I moved to the East Coast like halfway through my life so far. And I remember, it's like people would put books above this isn't my house, by the way, I'm in an Airbnb. But like people would put like books over or like big heavy artwork over their, bed in New York. And I'd be like, what are you doing? Right. So it's like definitely in me. But also that kind of metaphor, like metaphor, it's obviously related. So I think it's important where in the early years of the pandemic, I started writing this book. So it was sort of like October or November of 2020. And I was in Los Angeles where it's warm out. And I was recovering from, or like not yet recovering. I mean, I was like in a cast. Um, and so it was that moment, where the summer had provided, I mean, all of the uprisings and also for people who weren't interested in that sort of like back to sort of normal, like you can eat outside or whatever. And this whole idea, like the whole kind of, and we'd all been collecting some uninsurance, some relief for a while. And there was, it was that moment where it was a turning point, I think, from maybe things will all change to like some people were ready to go back to normal. So that whole question about what is normal was like very in the air, do we want normal? Of course we don't want normal. What do we want instead? Whatever. And then running into like that was another one of those, I think, splitting moments where I could never predict which people I would encounter were like, I just want to get back to like the way things were versus the people who were like, let us never go back to the way things were, right? It was like really and I understand the attachment to the familiar and but also it felt like this opportunity. So that was partly the metaphor, but also really importantly, I was learning to walk again. And I don't know, have you ever like broken a leg or had to relearn
Mhm.
to walk? I had never broken anything before this, and I've always been a walker. Like walking is probably the thing that I would it might be it's one of the things I would have the hardest time giving up, I think. And so it was pretty profound to not be able to do that. And in the course of my recovery, I had to deal with a few different doctors and physical therapists and things. And one of them, a surgeon who took out, I had a couple different pins in my ankle, and someone had to, one of them had to be taken out. And he just said this thing to me so that felt so rich metaphorically, but also I was really experiencing it. And what he said was, your body only wants to learn to walk once.
Mm.
So if you have to learn a second time, it's going to get bored and it's going to try and take shortcuts. And if you want to not sort of like if you want to recover, to the go back to go back to what you know as much as possible, you need to relearn every step along the way. And then he also said, like,
Mm.
you can even learn to walk better, you can basically you have to learn consciously to do something that you learned unconsciously the first time or with that. And that was so interesting to me because and then he said limps are almost always, or like asymmetrical walking after recovery is often not almost always, but is often it's like what can happen if you let yourself just satisfy yourself with like, well, as long as I can get over there. Your body just wants to get over there. It doesn't care what the form of it is. And you have, so I was going, when I started to be able to put weight on my foot, I was really like walking around thinking heel, ball, toe, heel, ball, toe. It was like a meditation. And then I would space out and I would notice that I was like walking kind of differently on my because I didn't have the muscles.
Mhm.
So the earthquake part was also yeah, it was also definitely about the the unsteadiness was in me. I was the earthquake. Like I couldn't I was very scared of anything, you know, I was scared of falling and hurting myself. Like I was, you're extremely vulnerable when you're recovering. So so there was no there was no like I didn't really know what would happen when the first time I like tried to go up a stair or, it's like everything was kind of like, whoa, like walking on a cliff or something. So yeah, so I think it was those different things, but certainly being physically in the place that I associate with earthquakes was part of it. And then of course there were starting to be earthquakes again. So
Mhm.
we had a few while I was there.
Yeah, but that's so interesting to have that happening to you, like your physical body, while this is happening, like in the COVID time, like with
Yeah.
the society, and
Yes.
this like really poignant, yeah, way of thinking about it. Like we could just start walking again, but like we really need to think about how we're stepping, like.
Right. Yeah. It's like, come on. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as a whole, we did end up rushing. I don't think we chose to, but we got rushed back into doing things as they were before. I feel like by corporations and governments and things. And now we're gonna have, we'll see what happens next year. We got what, like 6 weeks or something till the January
Yeah.
20th or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're gonna have another rupture.
Yep.
Carl also said bravo. He hasn't read the book yet, but he was
Oh,
looking at it. He said it looked great and he loves this press. And he told me that Painful but Fabulous was from the 16th press.
that what?
It's called Painful but Fabulous. The life
Oh,
of Genesis George.
oh
He
yeah,
said
yeah,
it's
yeah.
from the same press.
Yeah, yeah. They do good stuff.
Yeah, Carl wrote, I think he wrote the intro to this
Oh,
book.
that's great. I'll have to get it.
Yeah, so he's like, oh, that's a good press.
That's good.
So he says
I love all
bravo
those
and
Post-its.
congratulations.
Thank you. I'm such a big fan of both of you. I love that there's so much to explore. Like I love how generous you both are with your work because it's just sort of, I don't know. It's just like it's such a it feels like being a kid in a candy store to like find your way through as an adult, as like an amateur adult, like finding, it's like so all these para-academic like learning spaces are just so wonderful. And just, when you find like a door and you open it and it's like a mansion, there's all these rooms and then there's like this amazing backyard, and you're just like, oh, I can go here and I can like look at this and I can listen to this and I can watch this. It's like such a delight and so generous.
Yeah, it's nice. Yeah, it's like I wish I had that when I was like in formation, as they call
Oh my
it.
God. I know. I
But
know.
I'm glad that
Good.
I can
It's so
help
different.
others and through the formation so they don't
Yeah.
have to go through these like
Yeah.
boring institutes and stuff.
Yeah, and I wonder what's going to happen. I'm really interested. I keep talking to people I know who teach in universities, and I have a sort of I have a very steady teaching gig, but it's still adjunct. But even like, yeah, I don't know anybody who's in like firmly ensconced in an institution and is happy with their job.
Mm.
Like nobody, that used to be it used to be that there were like these few great, people were like, oh, I'm so lucky I have this amazing position. And no, I feel like nobody feels that way. And so what's going to be the future of these
Yeah,
things?
because they're just these big businesses and people aren't getting treated as well as
Yeah.
they should.
And the students
What do
know
you
that.
teach?
I teach I technically a sort of creative writing. It's like writing. But yeah, I mean I am very fortunate, but it's not because of the institutions. I just feel like I love my colleagues at the places that I teach. But I teach at Pratt Institute.
Mm.
Until recently, and maybe again, I've been teaching in the summers at Bard's MFA, which is interdisciplinary, which is where I went for my MFA. So both are art schools, and it's like an art school culture, and most of the all the other instructors are like working artists. So it's like very, very lovely in those ways. The parts where it's not lovely are like the students are paying too much, the faculty's being paid too little, the administration is taking all the money. It's not horribly draconian at Pratt, like they haven't been the worst for like this for the protests and pro-Palestine, activity, but they're certainly not the best. And, so but I do love my colleagues, and so I'm lucky in that way. But yeah, it's writing. So I mostly do as little as possible classroom teaching because I don't like that role of being the teacher in the room. And and I just kind of do a lot of one-on-one mentorship, a lot of small groups of like thesis advisement. And so it's mostly almost like an editorial and like a helping role, which is what I like. And then occasionally like we have studios that are co-taught. So I like co-teaching better than teaching, but mostly I like just doing like one-on-one. Like I do a lot of this with people where it's about their work, like just a long Zoom where we talk about their thing. And I love that.
That's great. And is there anything coming up or anything you're working on now or anything else that you want to mention?
Oh gosh, so much. But yeah, no, I mean, in terms of writing, I mean, I'm trying to figure out what to do with all these poems. I'm trying to finish this long poem. Um,
How
and
long
I'm
is the long poem? Is it
It's
like
not
a
even that. I don't know how long it'll be. It's like 35 pages now, but I think I have a bunch of work from the last like 10 years, and I'm trying to put it together into one. It feels like it's all connected. And so I'm just trying to conceptualize that. It's like in the background. And then I also have a sort of research-based novel novel the way that I write novels that is also in the works. So there, which has to do with Greece
Mm.
and and some weird facts about my family, but it's not autobiographical per se. It has to do with extraction and mining and like all these things. So I'm sort of I'm busy in the background with that, but I don't really spend a lot of time doing that. I'm doing I mean, writing. I don't, I'm doing a lot of herbs. I make a lot of like tinctures and stuff. I'm sort of obsessed with like learning herbalism. So that, and then I'm organizing at my school, and yeah, what's coming up? Nothing specific. I'm doing a few more readings for this. And I work with a couple collectives. I work with Ugly Duckling Press. And and so I'm doing some editing of some books for that and some fundraising. We're doing this weird like fundraising edition that's like a it's like an exquisite, like a multiply authored exquisite corpse of discarded lines. So we asked, you know, the thing
Ooh.
about just about kill your darlings. So we asked like hundreds of writers who have participated with Ugly Duckling to send us a line that is like a killed darling, like something that they had to take out of their pieces. And now I made them all into like index cards, and we're gonna like play this kind of game to turn them into like an exquisite corpse and then make a book out of that as a fundraising edition. So that's like actually a lot of work, but it's really fun. So I'm working on that. And yeah, just trying to and then I have a collective that I work with where I live in upstate New York, and we do a lot of events and hold, you know, reading groups and because it's sort of a physical space where people can gather, it tends to become very active around times like elections or like what's you know or crisis points or yeah, anytime that there's like a member or a part of the community that needs extra protection or extra support, or where people need to learn about something suddenly because because of politics. So I'm sort of we're gearing up to figure out how to like make that space ready for whatever it needs to help with. So that's sort of what's on on the plate.
Very cool. That was something that I also liked about your book that I hadn't mentioned before. You talk about cut-ups in it, and you have towards the end like these like wonderful like one lines on different pages that were really nice to read as well. And there was also this other thing that I remembered that you were describing her relationship with the guy, is JP, and how like when he starts talking like, oh, it sounds so interesting or something. And then like after a while, it's just like he goes on and on. And that was
Yeah.
really funny.
Well, I mean, that's sort of like, I've just really, I feel like I use that expression bait and switch a lot. And I don't know where that expression comes from. And I probably should look it up and wonder why I'm using it. But I'm just always really, because I'm so gullible. Like, I'm like, it's sort of like I was saying, like, Schopenhauer, this is interesting. I'm going to put that hat on. And then I'm like, wait, where am I? Where'd you take me? And so I feel like that's, yeah, there's a lot of people in that one encounters, especially when you start to think about conspiracies and, because yeah, or even like many of these self-actualization, practices, like they start out really good and then they end up somewhere unexpected,
You end
and
up in
it's
a cult.
very
Yeah.
hard to notice, but it's really hard to see them veering or swerving. And yeah, and I always feel like there but for the grace, like that could be me. So yeah, that's JP.
Well,
I'm sure
thank
you
you so much for coming on the podcast. And anytime you have something new that you want to talk about, just feel free to reach out. I'm happy to schedule you anytime.
Oh, thanks so much. It's been so great to talk, and I'm such a fan. And yeah, I really appreciate that conversation. And take care.
Bye.
Bye.